So we can start with your family's history in the genocide. Do you know where your family comes from in modern day Turkey?
My grandfather from my father's side, his father was from Agan, modern day Kayseri in Turkey, and they were forced to move out of Agan during the Armenian genocide, and they ended up in Aleppo. But I don't know the exact details.
And do you know, are there any other stories or any thing that you've heard from your family that you'd like to share about your family's genocide history? Okay. So, uh, did they initially settle in Aleppo, or did they settle somewhere else in Syria before that?
Well, the thing is, I don't really know that much about my grandfather's story, my grandfather from my father's side, but I do know that my grandmother from my mother's side, she was forced to move out of Turkey during the Armenian genocide, but I don't know where she was from. And I think initially she ended up in Lebanon, Zahla, and then she moved from Zahla to Aleppo when she got married eventually. I think she was 16, 17 years old when she got married to my grandfather.
And do you know what their jobs were, either back in, um, you know, Western Armenia, or what jobs they did once they settled in Aleppo?
Um, my grandfather from my father's side he was an artist. He used to paint, and I think that was his primary job. And my grandfather from my mother's side, he, he used to sell. I think he had a store in the Tiled region in Aleppo where he used to sell textile works, stuff like that. So
And do you know any of the difficulties or anything about what it was like for them to start new lives in Syria?
well, obviously, it wasn't going to be easy because they were first forced to move out of their you know from Turkey, and when they arrived to Aleppo, I guess it was very difficult at the start, but I guess they made it through because I'm here talking to you. You
Oh. Okay, so now we can move into your life and your childhood growing up in Aleppo. In which part of Aleppo were you born?
I was born in 1995, and we were still living in our house, my grandmother's house, in the Tilal. It was in the Tilal region, Aziziyeh. And then in 1996, we moved to the Villat neighborhood. My father had bought us a house there, and basically that's where I grew up in the Villat region.
And which school did you attend?
My first year of kindergarten, I went to the Gulbenkian school. It was an Armenian school, and then I don't know what happened. Um, I moved. My second year of kindergarten, I moved to Mkhitaryan Catholic school, and yeah, that's where I went to school to the ninth grade. And since they didn't have like a high school program, it was still the ninth grade. And after Mkhitaryan, I went to AGBU Lazar Najarian College Gulbenkian for about 5 months, and then I moved to Armenia.
And what was your childhood like? Well, maybe you can describe a little bit some of the activities that you did and some things you were involved in back in Aleppo.
Thing is, I have a very protective mother, So my childhood was like I spent most of my childhood like at home, with our cousins and my friends were my school friends. Mkhtarian High School was an Armenian school, but 90% of the students were Arab Christians. So most of my friends were Arab Christians, and then I had um, my cousins. They would come visit me. I would go to their home, and yeah, so that's how I spent my childhood to the age of 13, 14. And then I started going to the Tekeyan Cultural Association. That's where most of my cousins used to go. And when I started going there, I started making friends there as well. And yeah, I said there, I went there for like 2, 3 years. And then I moved to Armenia.
What was that association like? What did they do? What events did they put on?
You could say that I was kind of like a scout there.
Hmm.
I wasn't a scout per se, but something like that. But for example, we used to commemorate the Armenian genocide at the club. We used to call it Agump, which translates to club. And what did we do? We used to do meetings, events, lunches, dinners, some Arabic night parties, Greek night, uh, you know, youth stuff, basically.
Um, was it affiliated with any political party?
The Ramgavar political party, the
Um,
Democratic Ramgavar Party.
and would you say that Armenians in Aleppo were very divided based on party?
You could say that. I mean, the Ramgavar party and the Hanchakyan party, they were pretty much, one. They didn't have, they did have some differences, but, they were united in a way. They didn't really fight that much. But, you could see a huge, like a lot of people would say, I'm Tashnak Tsagan, you're Hanchakyan. For example, this happened to me one time. I was 13, 14 years old, and I went to Khomeletmen with my cousin. And we wanted to play football or basketball, I don't remember. And they basically threw us out of Khomeletmen because, my cousin, he played basketball with Hoyajit AYA. And they basically said, you can play here because, this is Khomeletmen, you're from AYA, get out. And yeah.
Um, and did you said that you commemorated the genocide at this Tekeyan cultural center, and I'm wondering, did the different groups commemorate the genocide in different ways, or did everyone come together for that event each year to commemorate together in Aleppo?
No, the members of the Tekeyan Cultural Association, they gathered at Tekeyan Center and they commemorated the genocide at the center. The Tashnak Sagans, the Tashnaks, they did the same thing at their center, and the Hanchabians, they did it at their center. So, I mean, of course, in the morning we did go to the cemetery, and each political party would, we would gather there, and, we were united in the mornings, but separate in the evenings.
So what was your commemoration like? You would go to the cemetery in the morning, and then what?
And then we would go home, get some rest. Of course, the stores, all of the Armenians and some of the Arabs as well, they would close their stores for the day in order to commemorate the Armenian genocide. And so we stayed at home, and then I went to the Tekeyan Center. And, basically we had a candlelit kind of not a dinner, but It was basically like a wake, you know. We would go there and, sad music. We would, I mean, every year we would build like like a sample of the Dizel Nagapert, and we would put it in the center, and yeah, that's how. What else? Did we do? Yeah, that's how we did it.
Um, and do you feel that growing up Armenian in a country in the Middle East in any way? Sorry, let me rephrase. I'll make it more direct. And do you feel that growing up Armenian, you felt like a minority in any way in Syria?
Personally, no, because um, most of my friends were Arab Christians. I had Armenian friends as well, but I mean, since I went to Balkhian and 90% of the students there were Arab Christians, all my friends were Arab Christians. I had one or two Muslim friends as well. And no, I mean, we didn't feel discriminated in any way, you know. Personally, I don't know about others, but I don't feel like a minority back in Syria, no.
And are you still in touch with a lot of your friends from
Some of them, yeah. I mean, most of my Armenian friends are in Armenia, but my Arab Christian friends, some of them moved to Sweden, the US, Canada, Europe in general. Some of them moved to Lebanon. And yeah, I'm still in touch with, a few people.
And so, how would you identify yourself? Would you, growing up in Syria, would you say that you're Syrian? Would you say you're Armenian? Would you say you're a mix of both?
Armenian and then Syrian. That's how I would identify. I mean, if someone asks me, where are you from? I would say I'm from Armenia. I mean, I would say I'm from Syria, but I'm Armenian. I wouldn't say I'm Syrian. Because, I mean, I'm kind of proud to be Syrian because at school they would teach us nationalism. We had a nationalism class, and I loved it. And they basically taught us, how to be Syrian and how to love Syria and stuff like that. But when I moved to Armenia, I didn't see that.
What kinds of things did they teach in that class?
That the Baas party is a very good party. The president is very good. His father was very good. Was very good, and he was. What else? There were a lot of anti-Zionist writings in the books as well, but most of it basically said that you should love Syria, you should love the president, the nation comes first. What else? They would teach us about Syrian history and how, during the First World War, the French occupied Syria. They occupied it, and then how they gained independence, and the history of Syria completely from 1920 till today. That's what they used to teach us.
Was this a class that was taught throughout Syria, do you know, or just in your school?
No, it was a class taught throughout Syria. It was a mandatory class.
Being in an Armenian school, how much of your curriculum was about Armenian history, language, culture, and how much of it was about Syrian Armenian language, culture, history?
I don't really remember how many classes we had during the week, but I think it was one or two. And I mean, we learned everything in Arabic except for English and French and Armenian. We learned French language and culture, English language and culture, British, not American, and Armenian. And I think we had two classes or maximum three classes a week where they used to teach us, the alphabet. I mean, in the kindergarten, they taught us the alphabet, and then growing up, you learn more about the Armenian language, history, the genocide, um, everything about Armenia and Armenian history.
And are there any specific memories from growing up in Aleppo that you think really characterize or define what it was like to grow up there that you'd like to share?
Personally, I mean, since I spent most of my childhood like indoors. I can't really say that I, love Aleppo that much. I mean, of course, I like it because that's where I was born, but I didn't spend that much time outdoors, outside of our home. So I can't say anything about it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about um, growing up in Syria before the war that I haven't asked you?
Um, we lived a very good life back in Syria, basically. I mean, my father had a very good job. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and we were upper middle class basically, and yeah, we lived a very good life back in Syria. It was a very comfortable life.
Sorry, I didn't ask about your family. What did your parents do? You said your mom did, but what did your dad do? And
My
do you have
dad,
siblings?
I have one brother. He's approximately 9 years older than me, and my dad, he owned a textile factory back in Aleppo. Plus, he loves cars, and he owned a car office. Basically, he bought and sold cars for fun, and that's what he did. He opened the factory in 1995, yeah, and that's what he did till 2012.
And uh, before the war started, um, were you working or you were in school?
I was in school.
And what year were you in?
10th grade.
Okay. And
When the war, technically I was ninth grade because the problem started in 2011, but didn't reach Aleppo till 2012. That year I was in 10th grade.
and before it started, were there any signs that you saw that could have indicated something was happening or going to happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, problems. There were a lot of problems in, Egypt, Morocco. Basically, all the neighboring countries were having a lot of problems. So, I mean, it was inevitable that it was going to reach Syria. But we didn't think that was the impact of the war was going to be this big. We thought it was going to be like Egypt. There's going to be a revolution. It might fail because, we knew that the government was very strong. So we thought that there was going to be an attempted coup or a revolution of some sort, and then it was going to fail, and that was going to be it. We didn't think that there were going to be terrorists fighting in Syria.
And so then you said that once the war started, it only hit Aleppo in 2012. And is that when it affected you? And if so, how?
We moved. I moved from Aleppo. I moved to Armenia in January 2000. No, it wasn't January. It was end of January, beginning of February, I think. And basically, there were a lot of things happening in Aleppo back at the time. There were a lot of kidnappings, besides that, no bombings, nothing. And the first bombing happened on, I think it was in March. So I can't say that I was affected by it in any way because I wasn't there. I saw it on the news. They bombed Halab Jadide. And yeah, and then I went back to Aleppo um, on May 15th, just because. And then we stayed there for about 5 days. I think my dad had to do some, work related stuff. We stayed there for 5 days, and then we moved back to Armenia, and that was it.
So when you moved in January of 2012, did you move alone?
Yeah, my brother, he was already living in Armenia, so I moved here. I traveled alone, and I lived here with my brother, and then 2 weeks later, my parents moved to Armenia, and that was it.
And why did you move before your parents?
Uh, as I said before, there were a lot of kidnappings happening in Aleppo, and they were targeting factory owners. So I don't remember how it happened, but my father, he used to say that he would never leave Syria, and because all of his friends were there, most of them, I mean, pretty much all of his friends were Muslim as well. His friends were there, his work, family, everything. His life was like completely based in Syria. And then one day I remember it was during spring break. I mean, our spring break is in January back in Syria. And like one day he came home and told my mother that, he told my mom to book me a ticket to Armenia and that I had to leave in like 2 or 3 days because he received a phone call from one of his workers. He he knew that one of his workers was working with the Free Syrian Army. He didn't know it, but he kind of sensed it. And one day he got a phone call at the factory asking about him. Where's Mihran? And my father said, he's not here right now. Do you want me to give him a message? And he was like, no, just make sure that he calls this number, following name, blah blah blah, when he comes to the factory. And he basically knew, and so he knew that something was bad was gonna happen. So he decided to basically send me to Armenia, and you know they were initially going to come to Armenia in a week, but since my dad didn't get to do all of his work related stuff in time, they delayed it. They delayed their flight for the week, for a week later, and yeah, that's how it happened. So I moved to Armenia because my father was afraid that the Free Syrian Army, members of the Free Syrian Army, were going to kidnap him or me. So that's how we moved, and it actually happened. When we were in Armenia. Actually, we were in the U.S. at the time, and that particular worker, they basically uh, raided the factory with guns. Like 10 people came in and basically asked them for money. The first time they did give the money. My dad was in the factory though. So they wanted money. They gave him money the first time. And the second time they came back, they wanted more money, and they said we don't have money. And they basically raided the place. They stole all the machines, everything. They blew the whole place up. I think.
And this was after you all had left Armenia?
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, Syria.
Yes.
And were most of the workers Armenian?
No, not most. I mean, I think my cousin worked for my father for like brief period of time, but all of his workers were Muslim.
And um, so, uh, how how old were you when you moved along to Armenia?
16.
And had your friends gone before you,
No.
or were you one of the first to leave?
I was one of the first to leave. I was one of the first to come to Armenia. I mean, most of my friends moved in July, August of 2012. I came here in February, yeah, beginning of February, end of January.
And how did you get here?
Airplane
From Aleppo?
from Aleppo to Yerevan.
And did you, when you first arrived here, did you live with your brother?
Yes.
And so, what were your first? Was it your first time in Armenia?
No. I mean, I think it was my 15th time, I think, or 12th maybe. I don't remember, but I mean, I've visited Armenia a lot before.
With your family?
Yes.
And so, I'm sure as a 16-year-old, it was hard to leave your friends and school and life behind. And so, do you remember at all what you were feeling or what it was like when you first had to settle in Armenia and start a new life for yourself?
When I first moved here, there was this one other Syrian Armenian kid who had moved before us, I think 3-4 months before us. And like he was my only friend here in Armenia, because when I started going to school, the local Armenians, I mean, their ignorant approach towards Syrian Armenians basically made me not want to befriend them or try and befriend them in any way, because they asked stupid questions like, "Do you have a gun?" or "Did you have a gun back in Aleppo? Did you live in tents? Did you live in the desert?" and stuff like that. So, I mean, those questions basically threw me off, and I just don't want to have anything to do with them. And yeah, I mean, I missed Aleppo a lot. I mean, this one time it was my friend's birthday. I think it was in April or May, the beginning of May. And I basically begged my father to, go back to Syria and spend my friend's birthday with him. But he said, no, it's dangerous. We can't go back yet. We'll go back when we have to go back, basically. And we went back May 15th. But yeah, I mean, pretty much every day I wanted, to move back to Syria, even though I knew it was dangerous. But, basically I was forced out of Syria. It wasn't like I wasn't voluntarily moving to Armenia. I was forced to move out of Syria, and that was pretty hard for me in the beginning.
And when you arrived in Armenia, did you enroll in high school here?
Yeah. It was the Hachik Tashtens High School, 114, number 114.
What was that like, going to a different school, a new school in Armenia?
The first year, I mean, I did my 10th grade first semester in Syria, and then when I moved to Armenia, I continued my studies here. So it was the second semester of 10th grade. It was weird, to say the least. I mean, I remember the first day when I went to school. I mean, back in Syria, like males and females shook hands. That wasn't the problem. But here in Armenia, I didn't know that this was an issue. And the first day, I went into the classroom, and the teacher introduced me to the students. This is a Syrian Armenian boy from Syria. He moved because of the war. Let's treat him good. I was like, okay. And a girl introduced herself to me, and I basically extended my hand for a handshake. And this guy basically, like, he pushed me and said, "What are you doing?" And I was like, What did I do?" And he said, "You shouldn't shake a girl's hand." And I asked why, and he said, "Because, you know, just because you shouldn't do that." So that was my first experience here in Armenia.
And I mean, what were some of the other, if you can think of any, barriers, either culturally or language-wise, that you faced when trying to integrate into the community here?
I mean, at first there weren't a lot of barriers because I didn't integrate with the locals. I didn't want to integrate with the locals. I mean, as I said before, I had just one Syrian Armenian friend, and I befriended him because I knew him back in Syria, but we weren't friends. But when I moved to Armenia, we basically became best friends during that time. So I can't really talk about the barriers in the beginning because I didn't really try and integrate. But when I started attending university, obviously I had to, communicate with the locals, and I could say that I befriended some local Armenians from the university, and but most of the local Armenians that I basically befriended were more open-minded people, like because I attend the American University of Armenia, and most of the local not most, some of the local Armenians there are more, you know, Western, you know, and they're not like, I mean, they're locals, but they're not like the local Armenians here. So those are the ones that I usually befriend. Because see, when I moved to Armenia, for example, I had a long hair, and it was taboo to have long hair in Armenia because, you know, they would call you gay. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it, but I'm not gay, you know. But just because you had long hair, you were homosexual for them. So that basically didn't really, I because of that, I didn't really want to, you know, befriend a lot of local Armenians.
So I know you said you didn't really join too many activities back in Syria, but were there any activities you joined when you came to Armenia? Any clubs at school or in university? Or any of the cultural centers here that you started going to?
There's this one organization that I work for as a volunteer.
What's it called?
It's called Aleppo NGO, and I've been working there for 3 years now as a volunteer, and that's the only thing that I've joined basically.
What do you do there?
Different types of things. We have it's pretty much the same stuff that we did back at Tekian Cultural Association. Meetings. We organize events again, lunch, dinner, parties for young adults, and yeah, I mean we pretty much do the same things here at Aleppo NGO that we did back at Tekian Cultural Association back in Syria.
And what draws you to working and volunteering there? What is important about that NGO and about working with it?
Helping people. I mean, a lot of. I mean, I consider myself lucky because I moved here early on, and I live in very good conditions. But I've encountered Syrian Armenians that you know they're living like they're basically living in poverty, and you just want to help them in any way possible. You know.
And when you arrived here and you were not with your family or your parents, did any NGO here or any part of the government support you?
No, when I first arrived here, I mean, I don't know if there were any, but I didn't. I mean, I didn't apply to any organization or anything. I mean, the only way the government helped me was that they gave me basically a temporary passport, or what do you call it? A special passport, a residency card, basically, a 10-year special Armenian passport. That's the only way that the government has helped me. And I don't know if there were a lot of NGOs back then to help Syrian Armenians, because there weren't a lot of Syrian Armenians here in Armenia when I first moved here. But of course, a year, 2 years later, a lot of organizations started helping a lot of Syrian Armenians. Whether if it's Mission Armenia or the Red Cross, Caritas, Aleppo NGO.
And right now, you have a residency card in Armenia?
Yes.
And was there any other paperwork or any other logistics that you had to go through when you arrived?
No. Nothing. No.
Do you think Armenia made it relatively easy for you to
Yeah, I
relocate
mean,
here?
yes, of course, because I'm Armenian, even though I don't have an Armenian passport. I don't belong to the country of Armenia per se, but I am Armenian at the end of the day. So they made it easy, basically. They didn't want a lot of paperwork from me. Just a visa, that was it.
And being here in Armenia, what would you say in the past 5 years that you've been here has been the biggest challenge for you?
Integration with the locals. The, that is the biggest challenge, because even though we are Armenians, there are a lot of differences between us and, let's not say us and them, but Eastern Armenians and Western Armenians. The long hair and the handshaking were just a couple of examples, but I think, in my opinion, the Muslims, the Arabs, that we lived with them for, decades, in my opinion, they were better than the local Armenians here in Armenia. They were more generous, they respected you more. Here in Armenia, the stupidest thing happened to me. Like, I added a girl as a friend on Facebook, and basically there's 4 or 5 guys basically tried to beat me up because I added a girl on Facebook. I feel like there's a lot of disrespect towards Syrian Armenians here in Armenia from the locals. Of course, not everybody. I have a lot of local Armenian friends here in Armenia. But yeah, basically the Kyartus that they call them, they're the worst. They're even worse than, Muslims.
What is that? What is the Kyartu?
The Kyartu is basically a local Armenian who wears black top, black jeans, not jeans, like Adidas shorts and stuff like that. And they carry knives with them and stuff like that. They're basically ignorant and racist and all that.
Do you think there's been anything, or sorry, actually before I ask that, do you think that there's any hope, or do you see in any future that those differences can become less, and that there won't be such a difference between Western and Eastern Armenians?
I mean, in due time, it was gonna get better. I think. You know, I mean, it takes a lot of time to integrate people, even though we are Armenians. But I used to live in Syria. I have a lot of Syrian traditions in me, and maybe one of the ways to integrate with the locals is to lose those Syrian traditions and basically become a full Armenian living in Armenia. But I mean, for example, I personally I don't think that that's going to happen for me. But in the future, when it comes to my children, my grandchildren, I think they're not going to have a problem integrating with the locals because I mean, like 11-year-olds, 10-year-olds, when they move to Armenia, their integration process is better than, for example, me when I was 16. You know, I mean that's pretty evident because most of the Syrian Armenians who moved here when they were 10, 11 years old, they have a lot of local Armenian friends. But most of the Syrian Armenians who moved here from my age group, like 16 to 20, they we still basically have our own little Syrian Armenian circle here in Armenia. We don't really like to get out of that circle, or that's just me. You know,
Do you think that the Armenians from Aleppo um, have lost anything by coming to Armenia? And you were saying, in order to integrate, maybe you can lose some of the Western Armenian cultures, or whatever you're just saying. Do you think that that has been happening? Do you think that Syrian Armenians from Aleppo or from anywhere in Syria who have come to Armenia have lost some of those aspects of being Armenian that
no,
you
I mean,
cited?
no, I don't think they've lost those Syrian traditions yet because it's only been 5 years. You can't just lose your traditions in 5 years. You can't do that. I mean, it didn't happen to me. I mean, there are a lot of Armenians here. Maybe some Armenians did voluntarily basically try to, forget about you know, forget about the fact that they're Syrian to basically try and integrate with the locals. But I didn't do that. I'm proud of being Syrian, and I'm not going to change for the locals.
Um, do you see any connection at all with um, what happened to your ancestors 100 years ago and what's happening today to Syrian Armenians?
Of course. I mean, the most simple thing is that my grandfather, my grandfathers, my grandfather's fathers, my great grandfathers were forced to move out of Turkey and being settled in Aleppo. And now, because of the moderate rebels and the Free Syrian Army and the Muslim militants, whether if it's ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra, um, we were forced out of Syria, my hometown Aleppo, because of those Muslim militants. I didn't want to move out, as I said before, but I was forced to move out. So that's like, of course, we were luckier, because my ancestors, they basically lost a lot of family members during the Armenian genocide, but we didn't. We were lucky. We had a country. We basically had Armenia, and yeah, a lot of my Arab Christian friends, they told me that a lot of my friends and my father's friends, they told my father and me that you're lucky because you have a nation to go to, Armenia, but they didn't have a nation to go to. I mean, Syria. I mean, they were born and raised in Syria for I don't know how many centuries. But we had a country to come to, and yeah, I would say that we're very lucky compared to our ancestors.
Do you feel in any way, and if so, how, that the Syrian Armenians have helped Armenia in any way?
Yeah, we have helped Armenia in a lot of ways. We opened a lot of businesses here. We introduced a lot of. Armenia. I think Armenia before the Syrian war wasn't really multicultural, you know. But when Syrian Armenians moved to Armenia, it became a multicultural country, a nation, because back then you wouldn't. For example, this is the simplest example I could give. Like the restaurants, they were all Armenian restaurants, local Armenian food, dry food. I hate it. And when the Syrians came to Armenia, they started opening their own restaurants, Middle Eastern cuisine. They introduced Middle Eastern cuisine, and what else? Oh, for example, the what do you call them? Mechanician? Mechanician?
Mechanics?
Mechanic.
Mechanic.
Mechanique. Mechanician. For example, I know a lot of let's rephrase that. For example, when my friend's car encountered some problems, we used to go to this local Armenian mechanic, and for example, he said that the Syrian Armenian mechanics are better than the local Armenians, and that the local Armenians are learning a lot of stuff from the Syrian Armenian mechanics. That's another example, and yeah, I think we've helped Armenia a lot.
And do you think that do you think that the experience that your ancestors had from the genocide helped in any way to prepare Syrian Armenians? Did you think it helped them be more prepared for dealing with the war currently? You know, how they say, like, learn from history. Do you think in any way it helped what happened 100 years ago helped? Do you think learning from what happened 100 years ago helped the Syrian Armenians in any way better deal with the war today?
I don't think a Syrian Armenian was preparing for a war in Syria in any way. They didn't think that they were going to leave Syria and move to another country. But as they say, it's the fate of the Armenians to basically move out of the country that they're currently living in and move to another country, because it's happened to us, twice in a century, for certain Armenians, that is. And I think, unless a catastrophic thing happens to Armenia one day, I think if any Armenian just continues living in Armenia, they're not going to encounter the same problems anytime soon. I don't know what's going to happen in another 100 years, but Armenians, their best chance of living a good life, a comfortable life, without being forced out of the country, is to live in Armenia.
And what has been your favorite or most memorable and enjoyable moment of living in Armenia these past 5 years?
most enjoyable?
Or most memorable? Or something that's made you happy to be here in Armenia? If anything. Keep thinking. But okay, so fine, if you can't think of anything, then how do you support your last statement of saying that coming back to Armenia is what needs to happen? Does one reconcile that with the fact that it's very difficult to live here and hard to integrate, as you've been saying, with local Armenians?
Well, if someone voluntarily wants to come and live here, then they might be willing to integrate with the locals. But personally, I didn't want to leave Syria. I was forced out of Syria. And then I came here to Armenia. And the things that I went through in the beginning basically led me to not want to integrate with the locals. But at the end of the day, Armenia is is basically the only country for Armenians, just like, Israel is for the Jews, for example. And the only place that you might feel the safest is Armenia. I mean, for example, I would never want to move to another Muslim country in my life. Never. Right now, I just, I want to continue living in Armenia. And you never know, I mean, maybe since I haven't really had like a stable job here in Armenia, if I start working here in Armenia, then I might integrate more with the locals. That might happen. I don't know. But at the end of the day, Armenia is Armenia. I mean, the only place that you could live, an Armenian can live comfortably, is in Armenia. That's my point of view.
Do you feel that you could move somewhere else that's not a Muslim country and live comfortably?
I don't really want to move to another country, because I just don't. I don't really. I mean, if I'm ever going to move to another country, it might be the US. And maybe for, if I find a very good job in the US one day, I might move there. But that's a huge might. Right now, I just want to live in Armenia. I just want to establish a business here in Armenia and just build my life here in Armenia.
If things were to get better in Syria, would you ever move back?
No. I mean, most of the Syrian Armenians might say yes because, they're really basically connected to the country. But if one day I do go back to Syria, it's going to be for, I'll go back, sell everything that I have, and I'll just move back to Armenia. That's all. If everything gets better, I might go there, for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, basically a vacations, some sort. But that's not going to happen anytime soon.
And is anything that you or your family have still intact in Syria?
Yes, we had 3 apartments back in Syria. One of them basically blew up, and the other 2 are still intact. Yeah, and then there's my father's car. What'd you say?
Business. Dealership?
The office, basically. And then there's the office and
And do you, is somebody in Aleppo watching over that?
There's an Armenian family living in our house currently, yes. So, yeah,
Um,
right.
and do your parents or brother have any interest in going back if things were to get better? Do you know?
No, especially not my brother. That my father always says that he's not gonna. I mean, he never wanted to move out of Syria in the first place, and now that he's here, he never wants to move to another country anymore.
Has your sense of being Armenian changed from, and was it different in Syria than it is now?
Of course, I mean, the past 5 years that I've been living here in Armenia, everywhere you go, people speak Armenian to you, even though it's Eastern Armenian, but still Armenian. You speak Armenian every day compared to back in Syria. I used to speak Arabic in school every day because, as I said before, most of the students were Arabs. But back in home, we did speak Armenian, and at the Balkhian Cultural Association again, we did speak Armenian. But here in Armenia, you speak Armenian every day, 24/7. You're not forced to speak any other language, except for English, because I go to the American University of Armenia, so. And then you hear Armenian music in the streets. You turn on the TV, it's Armenian. So of course you feel more Armenian just by living here in Armenia. I mean, even if you're a foreigner, and if you come to Armenia, then you're going to pick up a lot of cultural, traits, Armenian cultural traits. I mean, I know an Indian from AUA, and he wants to convert to Armenian, basically. That's how much he loves Armenia.
Why do you think, if it is at all, important to tell these stories?
To basically let the future know what we went through. It's the same thing that happened with our ancestors. They tell us all these stories, even though I don't know most of them, most of my grandfather's stories. But they tell us these stories so that we wouldn't forget what happened to Armenians. I mean, it happened. The same thing happened with the Greeks, and the Greeks do the same thing as Armenians. They tell their grandchildren that Greeks went through this during the First World War, and it's very important because we have to know what our ancestors went through.
And so, what are your plans for the next 5 years? Where do you see yourself? Where do you hope to be?
Well, first of all, I see myself in Armenia. I want to get my bachelor's degree and hopefully my master's degree as well. And then I want to establish some kind of a business here in Armenia. And,
What kind of business?
well, what kind of business? For example, I love cooking. So I would love to open some kind of a cafe or a restaurant here in Armenia someday.
Would you be the chef?
I might. I don't know.
I realized there's something I forgot to ask you. And something in line with what you just said. So you said that you see yourself here in Armenia in the next 5 years, but you've also spoken about things that have been difficult for you here in Armenia. And I'm wondering, within your plans for yourself, for your future, do you have any hopes to help work to change any of those things that have proven to be difficult for you, like integration or too much difference between Western Armenian and Eastern Armenians?
Rephrase the question. We got lost.
Do you do you have any interest or plans or desire to bring Western and Eastern Armenians closer together, or to lessen the difference, or any of these things that have bothered you about being here in Armenia, since you're going to be here for the next 5 years, you hope? Do you have any thoughts on what you could do to make it better here?
I mean, I'm only a man. You know, I can do. I don't think one person can change all of that. I don't see myself as, I don't see myself as a person who could bring Western Armenians, Syrian Armenians, and Eastern Armenians together. But I mean, integration is something that happens automatically, basically. I mean, it happens over time, you know. As I said before, my children are going to get integrated faster than I ever would, you know.
Thank you. Another thing I forgot to ask you, sorry, was you mentioned that you like to volunteer with Aleppo NGO, and I'm wondering, being on the volunteer side of it, do you have any thoughts or insights as to what the government or other NGOs could be doing better to make life more comfortable for Syrian Armenians here in Armenia?
Syrian Armenia need two primary things. First thing is housing. The second thing is to, get a good job, a good paying job. And I mean, you see a lot of, abandoned houses and apartments, especially here on Northern Avenue. Like there are like 3 completely empty buildings. I mean, a lot of Syrian Armenian families could benefit from just, not paying rent, because that's their main problem. They have to work for a whole month just to pay rent. I mean, besides the the bills, we're not talking about the bills, just the house rent, and they have to buy food, clothing, and all of that. And the wages here in Armenia, they're not, basically, they're not so much. They don't pay good money to people so that they could afford house rent, good quality food, and good clothing. And yeah, that's the main problem for Syrian Armenians: the housing and the jobs.
Thank you so much, Garen. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you'd like to add or say?
No.
Can you tell us a joke?
Oh, can you tell us a joke? Really? Yeah, please make it funnier than Level Sean's.
Joke.
And you can think about it if you want while you tell us what 2 characteristics you would use to describe yourself.
Carefree. And carefree and I don't know, just.